Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And tonight we've seen Last Night in Soho, Edgar Wright's new thriller.
Which everyone is going crazy over.
Psychological horror set in Soho in London, and you can tell it's been shot there and there's a lot of care that's been taken in portraying the place. And it's about this young girl played by Thomasin McKenzie. She plays Ellie, who is moved from Cornwall to London because she's been accepted to fashion school. She wants to be a designer, and she has visions. This is established very early on. She
can see ghosts.
She can see ghosts, and she sees them in mirrors. That way that, horror movies will show someone showing up in a mirror. When you look away and look back, that happens to her. But they're friendly ghosts, right? She sees her mum, who she misses and so on. As she moves into London, which is exactly where she wants to be, and she loves London in the 60s, Soho in the 60s, she starts having dreams and visions of the past. And you'll have seen this in the trailer. Anya Taylor-Joy plays a kind of double of her. And she's in love with it. And then the dreams start to turn into nightmares, and a history of the place is exposed. That's kind of as much as you can say in broad strokes without going into spoiler territory, which we are going to do very quickly, I think. Did you have a good time?
I did. Yeah, I mean, it's a really skilled film. The music lifts it, the locations lifted. There are kind of some pretty dazzling cinematic, techniques, right? I thought, I think people are going so crazy about it. I would like, to add some correctives is the wrong word, but a different opinion on some things. There are some things that I thought really were not good. Yeah, I thought the Michael Ajao, is it, character, the black
love interest.
Yeah, I thought he was awful, and I also thought the mean girl. I also didn't like that, the way that was played. It was so obvious and overlaid, and and it's partly the actress's fault, but I also think it's kind of partly in the writing. It's kind of.
I agree. It actually comes across, and it's been co-written by a woman. It's been written by Edgar Wright and Christy Wilson Cairns, who her debut feature was 1917, which she co-wrote with Sam Mendes, and she's done a little bit of TV as well. But she's kind of seems to be fairly early on in her screenwriting career, and actually, despite the fact it's been co-written by a woman, I kind of felt like this is a film that doesn't understand women. Actually, I felt like particularly in that clique of mean girls, I felt like, have you ever spoken to a woman? Have you met one?
I don't know. I mean, there are some things that you feel issues of gender have clearly been given a lot of thought.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I think there were things that, to me, for a director that I admire as much as Edgar Wright, seemed second-rate, really, or not right. Yeah, so I didn't like Rita Tushingham's performance as the grandmother. Yeah, it was almost like too earnest and needy, and so that was almost overblown a bit. Yeah, as well. I didn't like the lead performance either.
Thomasin
McKenzie.
Who's very good, and we've seen her at least once before. She was in Jojo Rabbit, playing the Jew in the closet.
Yes,
she was very good in that. I'm sure we've seen her once or twice else.
Yes,
in fact, we saw her in Old.
That's right.
M. Night Shyamalan film.
But this is a film in which she stars. Yeah. And I think there were moments that she just didn't pull off, right? Like, and particularly in her exchanges with Terence Stamp in the pub, right? It felt like really one-notey and, kind of slightly screechy. And again, I think that might be partly the writing, but certainly, the actress doesn't add anything to it the way that Anya Taylor-Joy does, playing the other part. So I thought, all of those elements put together, I think that's quite a failure of direction, really.
I think the writing is a problem. Actually, that scene that you mentioned downstairs in the pub with Terence Stamp, I was going to bring up the writing before you mentioned it, because that is what part of the reason that the performance is one note is because the scene is one note. The scene starts and just goes in one direction the whole way through. It's not a very long scene, but it starts in one place and goes straight to the other end without twisting and turning.
Yes.
And I suppose it's kind of building up intensity, because the whole point at this point is that she believes that Terence Stamp is the guy who has killed Anya Taylor-Joy, and she's trying to catch him for it. So like, I suppose that you do want to get through it and push through and build up the intensity. It doesn't work like.
And that seems so mechanical because really, you realise the only purpose of the scene with that handsome man in the 60s section was to pull this plot twist on you, which actually then feels so obvious.
The one where she says, "I think you're a copper."
Yeah. So even on that level, I thought it was clumsy. Yeah, that kind of, those things are meant to kind of evolve as a surprise, and you're meant to make these connections. And so things that didn't work for me were, at the very beginning of the film, it's like, they're each other's doppelganger, like they're the same person. When she's seeing this thing in the past, she is Sandy, right? And she, the next morning she wakes up with her hickeys and so on. And then that's dropped at a certain point, right? And then, like, why is it dropped? Why is she no longer, physically demonstrating that she's lived in the past with this person? I mean, it makes no sense.
That wasn't something I had a problem with. Because then the film, so it starts off with her kind of going through the mirror, effectively, and turning into Sandy, and Sandy turns into her, and then she gets stuck in the mirror following Sandy around in that club, watching everything going on. And then in a later, probably the next scene, she is there in the room with Sandy observing, right? So the relationship is not the same. And then at other points, she literally, between shots, turns into Sandy and back again, which I thought were really well done. I mean, cinematically,
they are really well done.
But the point is, I thought there was effectively a dream logic going on there that I was okay with.
Well,
that these are worlds bleeding into each other.
Okay, I'm fine with that as well. The worlds bleeding into each other. But what I don't understand is how, in some sequences, she becomes Sandy. Yeah, and she, and then when she returns to being herself the morning after, she shows physical manifestations of what's happened to Sandy, which never happens again.
It happens to her in the mirror, I suppose. I mean, if you watch that scene when Matt Smith is all over Sandy, she's in the mirror, Thomasin McKenzie, also being kissed by him. I mean, I think that is a form of an explanation for it, but the point is that I didn't have a lasting problem with it. I didn't have any problem with it.
I did, because then you expect it to happen again. So, that was one kind of problem that I had. The other problem was the introduction of the mother, right? Because, you're told that she sees ghosts because she sees her mother in the mirror when she's still living in Cornwall before she goes to London, right? But then the story of the mother's mysterious because she went to London as well, and then she committed suicide. So, I think things are being set up so that, either Sandy is her mother or her mother, had an experience like Sandy, or, that the mother would be brought up by the Diana Rigg landlady at the end. Yeah,
you definitely, I think, have some expectation that the mother is going to show up in the past somehow, even though actually it wouldn't add up. This is 60 years ago. Like, the mother would have to be an infant if there at all. It wouldn't, the maths wouldn't actually work out.
Well, except that the time logic of the film is also in itself doesn't make sense in relation to the contemporary, because the grandmother says, your mother and I went to Carnaby Street, and to Biba and to Liberty, and we bought fabric and we couldn't afford to go to the places. So the implication is they were there in the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which would make them 100 years old.
Unless the film is set in the 90s, which, if it is, I hadn't really picked up on.
No,
and everyone's got mobile phones.
It can't.
No, all the mobile phones are 2020 mobile phones.
It's set in contemporary times, because also it's the London School of Arts, right? Which I think is a recent thing.
And the whole thing about, do you know what a landline is? Because kids your age don't and all that. It is set today. So,
it is set today. So, but the photo is of the photo when, grandmother and mother went to Carnaby Street.
Yeah, in 1991.
Well, it must be. Yeah. But the implication is that they went there in the 60s.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because that's what starts off the whole 60s thing, right?
Yeah.
So all of those things, I think...
That isn't worked. They're trying to slip that past you, and we've nailed it.
I mean... when you begin to think logically about it, or that doesn't make sense to me. So I think there were all these problems that are kind of glitz over, by Wright being a great director of of movement, really. The way that sequences fold into each other, and it's really wonderful.
It's a film that moves really, really nicely. And I think as well as movement, which you're absolutely right about, he's a great director of mood
Yes.
and tone.
Except, and this is where I fault Thomasin Mackenzie, I thought those moments where she went off the rails and screeched and she had the zombies after her, I really thought that was like too one note. Yeah, like it didn't make sense, and it happened too often. Right, she would start kind of screaming, go out of control, and run away in a mad frenzy. And you think, like, well, a character might begin to wonder, are these people real? Can they touch me? Can they hurt me? Yeah, I mean, just, not always to be the same thing and to respond in kind of the same way. I didn't like that. So I think he's great on tone and so on, but there were moments that I think didn't work for me. So
it's clearly kind of a pastiche to some extent based on things like Suspiria, and that's a clear reference point. And it makes me think of that one note thing that you talk about in the sort of horror action. Makes me think of this kind of fake trailer that he did for Grindhouse, which was the Tarantino Robert Rodriguez double feature, and they had these 4 fake trailers in the middle, and he did one of them, and so it was a trailer for a movie called Don't. And it was like, if you're thinking about going in that room, don't. Voiceover. And it was very charming. But like, it's a trailer. The whole thing, that trailer is one note. I mean, it's like a minute and a half long, and it's funny. But then it actually feels like that is kind of what's been expanded into the horror here, because there's not a huge amount of variety in it. And when it gets actiony, at its most actiony with all the blank faces following you around, there's really no variety in that, and one scene of those faces is like any other. I did like them. I thought they were effective and creepy horror villains to have hanging around, but there wasn't a lot of development.
No.
Until you get to that final scene with them, which sort of complicates matters.
Yes, I mean, okay, what I liked about the film is, this arc of female bonding that it has. Right, and this what begins as a kind of a romanticization of Soho, that then slowly reveals all the grubby underworld, the prostitution, the drug addiction, the pimping. And that reverses gender expectation. So it's all the men who've been killed who say, "Help me," and then reverses it back again, because I thought it was important. I thought, my God, yes, I hope it doesn't end like this, right? Like, because that would have been like a real problem.
Yeah, so maybe we should just say exactly what happens for people who aren't interested in seeing what happened or whatever. That the Anya Taylor-Joy character that we see visions of back in the 60s is a real person, and she's someone who is seduced by the glitz and glamour of Soho, and she wants to go there and be a singer, be a star at the Rialto. She meets Matt Smith, who is a manager.
And who was wonderful, actually, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I to be fair, I don't think I've ever really seen him in anything.
I normally don't like him. He's too cocky, and he's got this really angular face. But actually, I thought he was really wonderful.
I think his look really suits the film. And
it does.
His face, he's shot from certain angles, or he holds his face in certain ways. The way he puts a cigarette in his mouth always is quite stylish and intimidating in this. And he looks out from under his brow, I think it's very good.
It's almost like the stars who don't need direction are wonderful in the film. Because I thought Terence Stamp was wonderful, Diana Rigg was wonderful, Anya Taylor-Joy, wonderful, I thought, But then kind of, it's almost like they don't need any help from a director. But then, the other performances, or the people who are less well known or who are younger,
need a bit of help.
Those are amongst the weaker performances. Yeah.
Sure. So Matt Smith is this manager, at least that's what we're told initially, and he can manage Sandy. That's the Anya Taylor-Joy character. He can get her a gig. He can get her an audition. And she does well in this audition, and she becomes part of the stage. She's not going to be the new star. She's part of the dance troupe at this place. And it's a kind of dirty burlesque dance.
Well, she thinks she's going to be singing, and then you realise it's a burlesque show.
Yeah.
Right. And
so this is when the flip starts to happen, and actually Sandy starts to realise that this is not all it's cracked up to be. There's this seedy underbelly, and then on top of not being the star and doing this burlesque show, she's going to be asked to prostitute herself to dirty old men who she, in the first scene you see her, she turns one away and Matt Smith punches the bloke in the face, and then later when she sees Matt Smith hanging out with the guy and having a laugh, that's part of the realisation that, oh, I've got myself...
She's been played, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then these are all the guys who turn up as ghosts in the real world in which Thomasin McKenzie lives. They start bleeding into the real world. And these are the guys who, in the room in which Thomasin McKenzie is staying, bedded Anya Taylor-Joy. And we are led to believe, and what Thomasin McKenzie is led to believe, is that Sandy was murdered by Matt Smith in this bed.
That's right.
And what the twist turns out to be at the end, as we were saying, is actually Sandy, who also turns out to be the woman who owns the place.
Yeah.
Sandy killed all these guys in this bed. She stabbed them all. And so that's why you get these ghosts saying, help, help me, help me. Which is where you say, oh, this twist comes in. You think, I hope she doesn't help them. Because they are still bad guys.
Yeah.
But then it flips it back and she's not going to. But it still ends up with this thing where someone who is in the movie... She's basically a mad serial killer. But she has good reason to have taken out on... I'm not saying like people should go around killing 100 men. But in the movie world, she's kind of a hero. She could be constructed as kind of a hero. She's made out to be this kind of sad case in the end.
Well, I think it's important that she's made out to be a sad case, because basically it's like, all these men, beginning with Matt Smith, right, who tried to kill her. Yeah, which is, where you sense the first turn happened. Yeah,
because then she turns the knife back on him. And that's what we didn't see at first.
Yeah, so it begins with him, and basically you do... Well, she says, I think at some point... they took my life away, right? So
I've been living in a prison for so many years.
So I think it's all made really quite understandable. And then there's that lovely moment of solidarity, between the two young women at the end, which is also a moment of comprehension, that she understood, and therefore we understand, what led this lovely young girl to end up, as this old serial killer, right? So that aspect I liked very much, that arc, right? So I love the look of the film. I love the music. I loved how it moves. I love how individual scenes are handled and how one goes from one to the other. But I thought, it's a film that also has, I think, very considerable weaknesses that I don't see anywhere reflected in the criticism that I've read so far, where people are just having like massive wanks about, how great Edgar Wright is, which I think is a real kind of failure of critical faculties, really. I mean, obviously he is the British darling of the moment. It's a film about London and Soho, so already people are having orgasms about it. But, if you can't see these faults that are really very considerable, then you can't see it all.
It feels to me also very simple thematically, and I suppose in some respect this is a similar criticism to the one I was making of The Last Duel we saw recently, which is that I wanted more... I
disagree about The Last Duel.
Which is that I wanted more complexity, and actually it felt very simple. And the thing is, it's really good to have a big budget film like The Last Duel talking about something as serious as sexual assault and providing this woman's view, offering it, and taking her side and so on. But then I feel like I kind of took that as read and then went, but it doesn't do it very complexly, or actually it's too simple how it does that.
Well, we don't agree that it's simple.
And I think something similar is going on here. This very simple observation that in the underbelly of glitzy, glamorous Soho, it's deeply misogynist, it's deeply patriarchal, the women are all being exploited.
I also think it's simple-minded. I think this film is simple. Or not as complex as I'd like to be. Because one of the things that I wanted the film to show was all the fun of Soho, right? All the fun of that period, right? And, I think a more complex film would have shown both intertwined. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, it does it initially, when you first meet Soho.
I know, but that's almost just there to show you what a false facade that is. That really there's this horrible underbelly. And then kind of you're moved into this horrible underbelly and you see nothing else. And actually that's part of what I think the film is simple, right? Because I think a more complex depiction, would have involved at least a dialectic of, these pleasures, the joy, the fashion, the money, Yeah, the glamour, maybe meeting a couple of movie stars and rock stars, as along with the descent. Yeah, there has to be something that is driving her. She could run away. She could go back home, right? What's keeping her in Soho?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, sure, the guy beats her up or whatever, but you don't show that she's in love with him, which might be something that keeps her, right? So, I mean,
Yeah, it should be like the price that she pays for the great stuff that she gets is going through all of this.
And she loses sight of the decline.
But she doesn't have anything
but
great
there's no
that she
fun
gets.
in it. So I do think it's too simple. And actually, I think it does a disservice to, well, I was going to say women of the period, but even of women now, right? There are always kind of reasons. And I don't think you get a full picture. You think, why does she, So there's a moment where the cop who we know will end up being Terence Stamp. We don't know. Yeah,
we know now.
We know now. Says, well, you've already given up, haven't you? Right? If you can't look in the mirror, you've already given up.
Right.
Yeah. And you think, well, why has she given up? I don't understand why she's given up. It's just begun, right? Why has she given up? So, okay, this guy might have forced her to sleep with, a few men, but why doesn't she run away? Yeah, why doesn't she go to South London, and get a job in a pub? I mean, so, I mean, I know that in real life there are many reasons why people don't, and that's why they end up the way they end up. But at least, a film has to make it understandable to us. What is the lure and the pull of staying in that world? Yeah? So I think that's, to me, what makes the film simple.
And you also don't get that from the older Sandy, who, even though we don't know that's who she is for the majority of the film, I mean, you want to think back on lines of dialogue that express, something that in realising who she is. There's nothing that enriches her character, actually, in retrospect.
No, and one of the main things, you see, so I think there are entire dimensions that are missed out, because obviously one of the main things that would be keeping her there, not wanting her to sell the house, is all the bodies that are buried under the floorboards, right? Because there's a reference earlier on, in the summer, make sure you lock the drains or something because it smells.
Put the plugs in.
Yeah,
the smell comes up.
Yeah. So, yeah, and then
you do see a shot later on when it's all being revealed that she's this murderer. There is this shot of bodies going under the floorboards.
Yeah.
But it's a close up and you don't really know where. And it would be nice to see the bodies somewhere, right? Let us discover them.
Yes.
Maybe even in a post thing. I mean, this is the kind of film where afterwards, what we find out after the majority of the action has ended and we get the denouement is we see her terrific fashion show. She's done very well at school and she's got this great fashion show, well done, and she sees her mum again. But this is also the kind of film where you would get just like a line of dialogue about all these bodies being exhumed from the house and how she's, this woman who's just burned upstairs has been revealed to be this mass murderer. None of that.
It's a film that feels like almost all the attention has gone into the visual dramatization and very little work, or not enough work, has gone into all the dimensions that the script offers, or that the storyline offers the script and then the movie, right? Because I do think it was really beautiful to watch. I mean, there were some shots like, when you see the reflection of the rain in Soho, and then it moves up in all the neon light, or that moment where she enters is it Trafalgar Square, right, where the Café de Paris is, and you have the James Bond poster. I mean, those are kind of like
the Thunderball.
Yeah, it's fantastic moments, really.
But a bit empty feeling. I mean, the thing is, actually, I was comparing this before we saw the film, just on principle, to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because I kind of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is so clearly a love letter from Tarantino to the era of Hollywood that he loves, and this felt like it was going to be a similar thing from Edgar Wright to the era of Soho that he loves. And I think there's elements of it. I mean, you do feel love of the place. I think it's in that it is in that Thunderball shot. You really feel the wonder, But obviously, it's very keen to get into this underbelly. But
it's very keen on getting into that underbelly without conveying the excitement and the sexiness and the lure of that underbelly. Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say is that in comparison with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the depiction of the place and past here feels kind of shallow. I mean, I suppose shallowness is something it's a word you would associate with Tarantino. He's so proficient; it's all image, but there's a real heartfelt love in that film for the era that he's depicting.
Well, I do. I do think that is also in this film. It's almost like the film is too patly moralistic, really. That the lure of the bad, such a staple of literature and drama and everything, right? Like film noir, everything, kind of badness is sexy, sex is dangerous, and yet, people do it. Kind of money's evil, but people go after it, right? Just like those basic things. I mean, that is part, and the freedom, that might go along with that, and then obviously the traps of all of that, right? But the film only understands the traps and the fall.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the case here. Bad is just a prison, and it's something you can't escape from. It's not something that you choose to be in, or understand, or pay a price for, whatever that kind of thing. I agree with that completely. And it's funny that that clique of mean girls early on, the leader talks about Ellie having like a born again Christian vibe. It's actually, I think.
The film does.
It is. It's sort of scared of its own badness. It's unwilling to explore its badness, to find it appealing.
Yes.
It is visually stunning.
Yes, it is.
I mean, stunning. It's one of the best films I've seen all year. Best looking films I've seen all year. I was really, really impressed with every shot that involved one character turning into another. I mean, I thought it was incredible. And actually, it really gets past you how smoothly it's done. There's one shot in particular, because some of it's done through cuts and things, and you get, there's a bit of image replacement in the back, whatever. But there's one shot in particular, which is when Matt Smith dances with Anya Taylor-Joy on the dance floor, and then she turns into Thomasin McKenzie and back again. And that appears to be a single shot.
It does.
How they did that, I have absolutely no clue. Yeah. And I would love to find out. I thought that was incredible.
There are dazzling moments with the camera. Yeah, I that's why I keep saying, he's great with movement. Because they're not just visual moments. It's not just a question of set design or lighting. It is about like set design and lighting and camera movement with the people placed in all of that. And it is actually, dazzlingly inventive and beautiful to look at and kind of narratively seamless. I mean, that is the strength of the film. And I think that is, partly why people are going so crazy about it, really. That and the soundtrack.
I wasn't mad about the soundtrack, I must say. There were a couple of songs that I liked. There's one by the Kinks, but...
I know, I love the soundtrack, except, I hate Cilla Black worship, because I really dislike her. I dislike her as a personality. I mean, I know that she has this nostalgia for British people of a certain age and beyond.
Yeah, of a certain age.
Yeah, because of the pop music and then Surprise, Surprise and all that stuff. But I hated the persona. I hated the faux Liverpool crap.
She was from Liverpool.
I know, but she, she wasn't from Liverpool all her fucking life, right? Not in her mansion and wherever it was. So, I hated that. But actually, I also don't like her voice, right? Like, there are American versions of all the songs, of all her big hits. Yeah, all the big Hal Davis and Burt Bacharach songs. All done better, I think. Right, and there's a moments when she hits high notes, and there's a flatness to it. Yeah, it's like almost she doesn't hit it fully, or it. When she hits it, it's not round enough. Yeah, there's kind of So
that's like Liverpool nasally. You can tell me about Liverpool.
I love Liverpool, and I love
Jamie Carragher
Liverpudlians.
Well, I've never heard one of her songs, at least until this film, and I couldn't tell you which one was hers or which ones were hers. So I don't know them.
Anyone Who Had a Heart was one of them, and I forget the other one.
I mean, I was probably in my 20s when I found out she had been a singer. Like, I knew her from Surprise, Surprise and Blind Dates.
The film highlights her, though.
Yeah.
Because they could have chosen a myriad of singers of that period. And it's not just because I think they only played 2 of her songs in the soundtrack, but they have her and her albums featured throughout the film.
Yeah, and she shows up. She's a character.
She's a character in the film.
Matt Smith talking to her, and they say Cilla Black about 5 times in 10 seconds, which felt like overkill.
Yeah, so
you could just call her Cilla. Surely, even then, people were just calling her Cilla.
Yeah, I don't know.
It reminds me of when I was watching Peaky Blinders, the first series of Peaky Blinders. Some character mentions Rackham's department store, which is a department store in Birmingham, but she says Rackham's department store, whereas everyone would just call it Rackham's. You know, and it's because you have to explain to the audience who has no fucking clue what Rackham's is that it's a department store. Yeah. But you know, if it's authentic, it's Rackham's. If it's authentic, it's Scylla.
So I think it is a film that is drawing on people's nostalgia for something that most people haven't lived through anyway, but a kind of a nostalgia for an idea of, you know, of London and Soho and glamour, and, you know, pop music.
And it's a film that wants to say the right things, or have the right kind of attitude about the underbelly and exploitation of women and so on and so forth. But it's pretty simple-minded about all of that.
Yeah, I agree. So,
and overly moralistic.
Yes.
It comes across as.
I think so.
I thought it was quite interesting. Maybe this is a very minor thing, but I thought it was interesting that the ghosts of all these men. Well, for one thing, I thought they looked terrific. The kind of the shapeless kind of multiple faces that they had. I thought it was very, very creepy. They kept being referred to as blanks. Well, at least once or twice they're referred to as blanks. And in The World's End, which is the third Cornetto film, which is the Edgar Wright. Edgar Wright directs those. They're the British comedies with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. The villains in that are called blanks.
Oh.
They call them blanks because they can't come up with a good name for them. But then the thing is that thematically, each villain to each character becomes a representation of their inner turmoil. So for the one character, it's alcoholism. For the other character, it's fear of cheating on his wife or whatever it was. So that works, right? Like everyone has their blank to deal with. Whereas here, they are a very specific thing, which is male oppression and rape of women, basically.
Yes.
And I was curious. There definitely seems to be a relationship between blank in one and blank in the other. I can't get my head around where the connection comes, because, you know, I suppose the idea of it being a faceless enemy that comes from anywhere. It's a film that kind of ends up being fearful of men almost entirely and not putting it into detailed context.
No, and also, I mean, I didn't like all of that anyway. You know, I thought that was really misguided and misjudged because, you know, not every man who goes sees prostitutes is like this brutal, you know, macho pig. In fact, the opposite. I mean, people often go to prostitutes because they're lonely and they're sad and they've got nobody and whatever, you know, and, you know, they see it as a transaction. They're not coercive or what. I mean, you can imagine a lot of situations and, you know, like that. And, you know, those people don't deserve to be killed. And, you know, the film kind of, I think, doesn't distinguish. I mean, to be fair, what you do see are pretty awful men. But the only one that you see brutalizing her is Matt Damon. Matt Smith.
Let's not tarnish his good name.
Yes, okay. You're right. Matt Smith. So yeah, Again,
it's a pretty one note. The one man in the film who isn't like that is the young art student, the love interest.
Well, and also you eventually find out the cop.
Yes, there's the cop. Which was a pretty badly handled story element, really.
Yeah, it was.
Mind you, I didn't see coming that Sandy would be the landlady. I think you're being so clued in throughout to see Terence Stamp as Jack, the Matt Smith character, and you know the film really starts making it explicit to the point where she accuses him. You feel like when it's revealed, at least I felt when it was revealed that Sandy was the old lady, I was going, of course, why wasn't I looking there? You know,
That was a surprise, and that was an effective moment in the film. That was a nice twist.
Yeah.
I also didn't see that coming.
I like being misled when it's good.
And the wonderful performance, you know, from Diana Rigg, her last,
and the film is dedicated to her. Why not?
So, anyway, it's a film that I would highly recommend, you know, but don't go in with overblown expectations. It is by no means a great film. You know, people have been saying it's the film of the year. I think only if you're like a blinded Brexiter, you know. Otherwise, you know, it's a film that has, you know, some virtues and many failings, and that is very enjoyable to watch. To me, it also felt a bit long in the middle. Yeah.
What's a Brexit got? Oh, because it's British, and you just go, any British film would be great.
No, but because I think the film's draw, with the film.
Oh, the nostalgia.
Is the nostalgia for the 60s and for Soho and for pop music and Carnaby Street and Biba. Yeah, all of those things that the film mobilizes, yeah?
It's funny, though, because despite the fact it's definitely trading in that kind of nostalgia, I can't imagine it being a film that people of that age are going to be that interested in seeing. Whereas if you think about...
but it's not that people of that age necessarily who are nostalgic for it. I think there's a nostalgia for 60s Britain by all of the fucking country. not just the old people, right? That's where the Brexiter came in.
Possibly. I'm not sure. But I'm just thinking, if you think about that King of Thieves that we saw a couple of years ago, which was the film about the Hatton Garden robbery, the heist, which was the old people breaking in. Like, that was so coated in not only nostalgia and kind of love of Britain, and in quite a dirty, nasty, homophobic way. But also ended up with those clips of all the actors' films from when they were younger. And you think, this is just about reliving the past.
Yes,
anyway.
Well, it's not that kind of nostalgia, because, I think those were films for 70-year-olds, and, that the Great Marigold Hotel, or whatever it's called.
The Best Exotic?
The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel started a trend and developed an audience amongst, that generation of people. That's not the same thing. But this is nonetheless drawing on a cultural nostalgia, for a different, better time when the music was better and the fashions were better, and blah blah. So, and that is the lure of the film with audiences. I'm quite certain of it, of all ages.
Looked very beautiful though, so that's good. Better than nothing. I think I was right to go in with slightly lowered expectations.
Yes, I love Edgar Wright anyway, but this is not his finest effort. All right, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Our social media is Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.